Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Five podcast. I'm joined tonight by Yizz. How are you doing tonight, Yizz?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here to talk about something fun with a friend. Thank you.
Yeah, so last time we were together, I was on Discord and Dragons with you, and somehow Star Wars came up, and
Mm-hmm.
the prequel trilogy versus the original trilogy. And I thought, well, that'd be something fun to talk about because some of the other members of that episode were like, yeah, the prequels are better than people say they are. So I think for the audience's sake, Yizz and I are not supremely invested in Star Wars. This
Right.
isn't going to be some like crazy like Uber fans bashing each other, but we both have seen all six of those films, 1 to 6, and so in that case, the argument being that the prequels generally have been considered worse, and the worst, that is until the sequels came out.
Yeah.
In which case, the prequels have had a kind of renaissance where people have gone
And
back and
total disclosure, I've seen the prequels each 2 times. I've seen the original series maybe 4 or 5 times a piece, and I have only watched the new Disney garbage once just to say I've seen it, and it is as bad as people say. It's bad.
so what I would say though is with the prequel trilogy, and I'll just
Mhm.
open up with a brief defense of the prequels.
Sure.
What I think is interesting about the prequels is what Lucas is trying to do, because this is the first time Lucas had full creative control over the film, and what he wanted to do, at least at the sort of like bigger level, was tell a sort of morality tale about how the Republic can fall. And so this was during the War on Terror, right? So this was the backdrop to him making these films, was the War on Terror with Bush's invasion of the Middle East. And so he's sort of saying that you can create an emergency, and of course, as we see it in episode 1, it's Palpatine who's playing both sides of the situation. And then he creates an emergency to grant himself emergency powers to then dissolve the Republic in the favor of an empire. Mm-hmm. And that's the main story of 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as well as where do we get Darth Vader from? Because the whole point is, how do we balance the Force? That's Anakin Skywalker. Mm-hmm. And so he's like the second main part of the prequel.
And the prophecy was mentioned in the original series, so they wanted to have the prophecy be something the Jedi talked about in the prequels, obviously. That was a big part of it too. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, most people objected to the idea of the politics. They didn't like the Jedi Council scenes. A lot of people thought that was boring. I didn't. I thought that was kind of interesting to see how you could imagine a sort of political drama in space. Like, what were the political issues that they would be concerned with? What would they be?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing people didn't like was Jar Jar Binks, and we'll get to him a little bit later.
Yeah, I have a few things to say about that, and we talked about it before the show. I'm sure it'll be fun.
Yeah. And then also the other thing people didn't like was Anakin and Padme's relationship. That was the other thing people didn't really like at the time. Now, was it great? No, but like compared to especially the sequels and certainly other films that you can compare that to, it wasn't the worst. There seems to have been a tremendous amount of animosity that came out at the time that's difficult to account for. Like, for example, the actor who played Anakin, his life was pretty much ruined. The actor who played Jar Jar Binks, his life was pretty much ruined. And it's like all for that one film. And it's like this. Notice all of those people that hated episode 1 loved episode 7. So just remember that, everybody. Okay. All the movie reviewers that were like Red Letter Media, for example. I think that there's something off about their criticism of episode 1.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah.
Disclosure, I love Red Letter Media. I've been following them since, I think, 2013, 2012. I've known about them for a long time. I think they're funny. I think that they have some fair criticisms of the prequels. But of course, because they're comedic entertainers, they go over the top and go big with it. Now, also, don't forget, Mike and probably Rich are the insufferable consumer fanboy types who, Star Wars and sport ball and things are big parts of their identity. Very sad. So they're going to have some sympathies and feelings about all this I would never have. But I do think there's one primary criticism specifically for episode 1 that I think is a very fair criticism that kind of makes the whole thing fall apart, which we can get to soon, unless you'd like me to get to it now.
No, we'll get to it now, yeah.
So we don't really have to bring up Red Letter much, but I was, of course, introduced to exactly how bad the prequels were by the Plinkett stuff, like a lot of people were. Now, when the movies came out, when all 3 prequels came out, I saw them all the week or weekend they came out in the order they came out in. And I was not impressed. And most of my friends were not impressed and they didn't like them. But it wasn't like anybody was like angry and like, oh, this is the worst thing we've ever seen. How dare they do that to us? Because my friends weren't really invested in Star Wars either. They weren't like super fanboys or anything. We just, oh, hey, it's a Star Wars movie. Let's go see it. And the main complaint echoed by my friends and myself was these are just boring and not well done. They have the energy and the pacing of like a daytime soap opera sprinkled in with a bunch of flashy effects here and there. And it just didn't really feel like we were getting a movie when we went to see them. We got a spectacle that was like a movie, but we didn't really feel like we got anything of substance. But the Palpatine thing, this is the fair criticism. The Palpatine thing doesn't really start until episode 2. But I think Mike Stacklasa brought it up in episode 1 review, maybe. I don't remember. But the criticism is everything is bland and no one has any real motive to do anything except Palpatine. And that criticism made me reflect on watching the movies. And I was like, oh, yeah, come to think of it, none of the people involved in doing anything that was on screen were passionate or wanted to do any of it. Like, Padme was put upon. All the political people were put upon. The Jedi were put upon. None of them seemed invested or interested in anything except Palpatine. And that didn't come about till the second one, obviously. But I remember watching the first one for the first time and thinking, like, this is weird. Like, this is back when it came out in like 99 or 2000. I was like, this is weird. It's like I'm watching this big flashy stuff and it's got the loud music. But then it's nothing but like soap opera filler. It's just really, really boring stuff of people walking back and forth talking about boring things they're not interested in. And that is the real criticism I have of the movies. Not the structure per se, not the topics, because I find the topics of a complicated space drama about politics and usurpation way more interesting of a story than the original series, than the original movies. But it was the execution that I thought was just dog shit. It was just boring. The characters were flat. I had no reason to be invested in the characters because they weren't invested in what they were doing. And then, of course, we can pick it apart like Stacklasa and say this doesn't make sense and this doesn't make sense. But I don't care about that when I go see a movie. I care about two things. Is it fun? And am I invested in the characters doing stuff? And it was neither fun nor was I invested in any of the prequel stuff, except a little bit for Palpatine. So that is my take on the stuff we just started with there. So let's go from there.
Right. So let me sort of bring up what I consider the positives in the prequel trilogy, including episode 1. So the pod racing scene was frame for frame pretty much the same scene from the chariot race in Ben-Hur. Yeah. And so there's this homage to a classic film, the Ben-Hur chariot race, with the pod racing scene. The Jedi fights, the Jedi Sith fights, are much better choreographed in my estimation than they were in the original trilogy. Now, admittedly, they didn't have the special effects, especially some of the stuff like the end of episode 1, the fight scene between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi on the one hand and Darth Maul. Yeah. And then the final fight on Mustafar between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin. I think as far as classic sword fights, those are some really well choreographed battles.
Oh, certainly. The choreography and fight scenes are the most memorable and most interesting thing in any of the prequels.
The sound effect. The track was good. The soundtrack, especially like ginning up for the fight scene, episode 1, I think had a great soundtrack. The other thing is
that was the one that went dun, 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 dun. That one, the way that they sort of mixed in the original music, but made it new for that fight scene. Yeah, is that what you're talking about? The one with the turning turbines where they had to wait to go through the gates.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really good. I remember the music really moving me for that.
That was really good. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing about it too is when you see and compare the sort of space battles. So you can see especially the beginning of episode 3, because there's a Palpatine is quote unquote kidnapped by Dooku, and so Anakin and Obi-Wan have to rescue him. I mean that's crazy. That whole space battle with all these Star Destroyers and everything. Now, obviously, in the 70s and 80s,
I didn't care for that, but I'll save my criticisms for later.
They didn't have that level of special effects. I get that, right? So But see, this is how Star Wars, even in its original sense, was, right? It's sci-fi. Sci-fi is primarily special effects. So special effects from the 70s and 80s isn't what it was in the early 2000s. And so, it is what it is for the time, and that's fine. But I think that when you look at, especially again with the lightsaber battles with the Jedi, that's a higher quality. Now, as far
on
as
a technical level, yes, but on a story level and a presentation level, no. Do you want me to take that from here and explain?
Go ahead.
Things need to have meaning for a viewer to be invested and to care, unless they're just, low IQ idiot consumer, and then who cares about them anyway? As a connoisseur of fiction, I did not think that even though the special effects were great in the prequels, they fell flat, and I didn't think that they were properly implemented, because when you look at things like magic spells in old fantasy fiction, or make-believe cyber space hacking in like early and mid 80s hacking movies where it's just all make-believe, and then you look at Star Wars. Star Wars is like fantasy in space. It's like fantasy sci-fi, and the lightsaber is like a magic weapon or a spell. And the Force is like wizardry and mind control stuff, right? So good fiction parallel or good fantasy parallels there in fiction. Those things have to be treated with a certain gravitas, or they become absurd. And in my opinion, that's the primary failing of the action and the cool stuff in the prequels, is they don't land right because it's just everywhere all the time. And again, like my opening criticism, I'm not invested in the characters. And every character can fly and has power armor and throws lightsabers. There's lightsabers everywhere, and force lightning this and force jumps and super speed. And it was more like sort of like a pulpy comic book than something that you should view and be impressed by and get invested in for a 2-hour movie or a 3-hour movie. And the presentation of just all of the constant, magic of the setting, right? Flying stuff, levitating things, spaceship battles, lightsabers everywhere, force powers. It just sort of took away what made that stuff impactful on screen to me as a viewer. It's just littering it everywhere, and it wasn't like something special or dangerous that was sort of brought out for a special occasion, like in fantasy fiction movies, like wizardry and magic swords and that kind of thing. So that's a primary criticism I have. Again, not the subject material or the technical prowess. That stuff's pretty good. It's the presentation and how it just didn't land with me as a viewer. So that's my criticism of the combat.
But here's where the original trilogy is going to have a set of expectations that's going to be difficult to transfer to a prequels.
Okay.
So the idea is in the original trilogy, the Jedi are scattered and divided and about to go extinct. And really, it's only in the last film, episode 6, Return of the Jedi, where Luke Skywalker becomes a full-fledged Jedi and does a lot of the Jedi stuff. Because we have Obi-Wan Kenobi, but he dies at the end of episode 4. We have Yoda in episode 5, but he's just kind of hanging out in the swamp, not really doing anything. So we fans from the back in the day are having this expectation of Jedi as sort of on the run and being outnumbered. And of course, there's only one Jedi. So even when Luke goes to Jabba the Hutt, he can't just go kung fu, bust all of the moves, because Jabba's outnumbered him. But you see, this is in the prequels. This is when the Jedi Council is helping the Republic run an intergalactic empire. The Jedi are going to act and behave in different ways because they're in the ascendancy. It's the Sith now that don't have the numbers. It's the Sith that are in the minority. And so, I think there's going to be a mismatch in expectations necessarily, because now we're dealing with the time in which the Jedi are ascendant. And then the question is, how could the Jedi be ascendant and then lose so badly? And one of the criticisms you leveled was that the characters were flat and unmotivated. But to what extent could we argue that that was a reflection of, given that this was a meta critique of America, and even the original trilogy was, so like Lucas said that the Imperials were the Americans and the Ewoks were the Viet Cong. He actually said that.
I know.
So, how would a ruling council like that be subverted? Well, if nobody cared. If nobody cared and was asleep at the wheel, that's how you get someone like Palpatine taking over.
Yeah.
So, maybe.
I have no problem with your meta commentary angle. Yeah. My criticism is about the movies, not what could have been.
No, but I think that's what it was. I think that's what he was doing, and why a lot of those characters came off as flat. If they, if for as some people thought they came off as flat, I don't know if I would agree that. From my perspective, I didn't see them as flat when I saw it as a kid.
Okay.
And then when I saw it a couple of years later, or a couple of years from now, so like 2001, I think I watched it with my brother.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what you can see, though, is the Jedi Council does have like a deadpan monotone to it. And I think that's because they're just kind of like smug and self-assured. They're just like, yeah, we're the Jedi. Like, hey, you're not going to do anything to us.
I agree with that. I think that what can't be overstated here is that George Lucas was a rich, fat slob that just wanted to direct from a chair, and all he cared about was making money and special effects to outdo James Cameron's Avatar. I don't think that, or James Cameron's Titanic in the case of the first movie. I think that any type of quality of George Lucas's ideas you ascribe to him is fictitious. I think that he is a morally and creatively bankrupt fat idiot now that would make the younger version of himself that made THX cringe. I think that in the prequel movies, we see what almost unlimited power and money and control does to someone who doesn't deserve to have it. We see the creative bankruptcy of George Lucas. Now, I've seen THX. I liked it. I liked the creativity and the spirit of A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie. I think it was all downhill after that. I think even the second and the third movie, despite me thinking that critically as a single movie, yes, I know it's a trite thing to say, but yeah, I do think that Empire Strikes Back is objectively the best Star Wars movie if you're just talking about movie quality. Yeah, everybody has to say that because it's kind of true, but I don't really care about that. What I care about is the creativity and what pulled me in. Empire didn't pull me in and make me have an exciting, invested time like New Hope. None of the Star Wars movies ever did that with me except New Hope. And I've still watched New Hope occasionally. Maybe once every year or two, I'll watch it with my husband. It's a great movie. We like it. It's fun. It reminds me of other fantasy movies of the time where, a young person goes on a quest or someone discovers a secret magic item and then the whole shebang, the whole movie's about that. Anyway, I'm getting a little off track here. My criticism with how and why the Jedi Council was presented as it was, even if, let's give George Lucas some credit, even if the whole thing was allegory for, look how shitty the United States government is and how the whole system is morally bankrupt and it's just ran by a bunch of careless managers that only care about themselves. That's fine, but I don't care about that. I care about what makes a movie good. And if you care about Star Wars at all, and you're there watching the movie, when it comes time to see the Jedi Council, they're supposed to be really wise. They're supposed to be able to feel the universe or whatever. They're supposed to care about prophecy. They're supposed to care about what is right, what is morally good or whatever, but also trying to be hands-off as to not steer the wheel because they've seen that be disastrous in their long past, right? Like it's old Republic stuff. They've made lots of blunders when trying to correct course too much or whatever. And that's what led to them being sort of hands-off. So when I see it presented to me in the movie, especially the second movie, I see these people that are supposed to be wise and hands-off, and yet it's like all of their powers just don't work. They don't understand or even feel that there's a massive coup afoot. They don't understand or feel that the prophecy boy is going to do some great, horrific, evil stuff and be involved in some of the greatest evil and dark side shit that ever happened or that has happened in hundreds of years or whatever. And it just, to me, watching it, I was like, what is George Lucas doing? Is he playing it obtuse on purpose because he's going to wow me with later the council actually had people in it that knew what was going on the whole time and they're actually going to step in and grab the wheel? No, that never happened. It was like they were just presented as a complete farce of what they were supposed to be according to the previous movies. And that to me just sort of flew all over me as a viewer. And I was like, does George Lucas just not give a shit about his own lore or his own movies or does he not care if none of it makes sense? And that just really made me disconnect with the entire prequel franchise. So that's
Well, let me ask you this question. This is more of an aesthetic question about film in general before we go further. So, okay, so obviously we all know that there are examples where, say, there's a director that has an intention for a film, and he makes a film now, and then the director says, "Well, to my satisfaction, it expressed the ideas that I was trying to communicate." Now,
Okay.
let's also say then that there's a bunch of people who watched the film and said they didn't like it for X number of reasons, and maybe
Okay.
this film was a part of a broader setting, and they didn't like it for not meshing into that broader setting.
Okay.
This is where it gets tricky, right? Because at what point do we play the trump card? Because we could also use a book. Somebody might write a book to communicate a set of ideas. So, like Tolkien, for example, he wrote the book that he wanted to read. Even if Lord of the Rings hadn't been wildly successful, which it was, it would have been a success because Tolkien wrote the book he wanted to read. So, right, what I'm saying is even if the fans, so if Lucas made the movie he wanted to make in the same way that Tolkien made the book he wanted to read, isn't that, I mean, from where are we analyzing the success of this as a storytelling device?
I'm analyzing it as a movie compared to other movies, not comic books or fandom. Presented to us in the original movies, assuming that's the way George Lucas wanted to present them. You have Obi-Wan Kenobi, veteran of a great war. Anakin was once a good friend. He's dead. They talk about prophecy, the wisdom of the old Jedi, how a Jedi can feel and think and feel the cosmos flowing through him, and he can use that for great good to guide people and to these words aren't in the movie, but predict the future and then make wise choices based on it. That's just from the movies. That's not me getting that from a comic book or any campaign setting for role playing or any of that stuff. Because I don't care about any of that. I've never looked into any of that stuff. I don't care. Just the movies. And then I get to the prequels, and it's like, okay, here's some Jedi in the first movie. They do some cool Jedi stuff, but they're really stupid. They're not making wise choices. They're not taking the information and doing anything wise with it. Why do they, like, I found myself in just the first prequel alone, what was it, Phantom Menace, watching the whole movie being like, what are these two up to? Why are they making these choices? Do they know something I don't know? And then come to find out by the end of the movie, nobody acted like they were acting with any intelligence or wisdom in the setting itself as presented to me in that movie and in the previous movies. Like, okay, let's say there's a trade dispute, right? And Jedi go to try to talk out a trade dispute. Well, they are there in a custodial fashion. If they are going, like, if the Jedi of that time don't want to take the wheel, so to speak, and don't want to, like, guide the course and they need to be hands off because of the Republic and all that, then why did the Jedi, when they learned what was going on, not just leave? Why didn't they just leave?
You mean Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan?
Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Why didn't they just leave?
Well,
like they just from that point on, all the prequels just didn't make any sense to me because it's like, okay, we have these people who are presented to us and we are told they are one thing, but all of the actions of not just those two, but the other Jedi in the movie show us they are not that thing they're supposed to be. Like, if I had to summarize my problem with the prequels into a single sentence, it would be, it's all wrong and none of it makes any sense.
Right. Well, with Qui-Gon, I mean, he's sort of already a black sheep. I mean, at the end of episode 1, the Jedi Council basically disapproves. I mean, the reason why he's not kicked off is some sort of seniority thing, which, I mean, we're all familiar with that. Somebody keeps bucking the system, but because of seniority, he's still there. And basically why Obi-Wan does what he does for the next 2 films is because he believes that Qui-Gon was onto something. Because remember, Obi-Wan says at the end of episode 1, even if you refuse to allow me to teach Anakin, I'll teach him anyhow. So there's this kind of like insurrection going on inside the Jedi Council, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The other Jedi are opposed to this. They don't really act until episode 3 when Mace Windu tries to arrest Palpatine. Now, of course, Palpatine arranges it so that Anakin's there and Anakin saves him.
Yeah.
So I think that, Qui-Gon's. So I think Qui-Gon's motivations are fairly clear. He knows that he actually, as we know from the end of the whole trilogy, correctly sees the prophecy. He sees that Anakin is the one, and he's doing all of this because the Jedi Council is stonewalling him. And that's how I take episode 1. Because there's a couple key scenes where they're just like, yeah, you're screwing up, Qui-Gon, but you're still on the council, so we don't really know what to do with you right now.
Okay, that's not interesting as a viewer of a movie, though. If you're looking at this as what could have been and looking behind what was in the movie, then sure. But I'm here to criticize the movies, comparing them as movies. And my criticism is going from the first 3 movies to these second 3 movies, the prequels. There's just something wrong about all of it. it's like it's not even talking about the same setting or the same characters or the same kind of Jedi. It's all different. It's all wrong. And it doesn't land with me. I was disconnected from all of them. I tried to get into them. I tried to like them. Jar Jar was cringe funny a couple of times. And then I liked Palpatine because I was like, hey, he's actually playing it up. He's chewing the scenery. And everything else was just kind of this deadpan soap opera. Why are these people doing this? These are just cardboard cutout caricatures of what I was told the setting was like by the first 3 movies. And I don't know. Like, it's difficult for me to just pick one thing that's wrong with it. That's why I'm just kind of going step by step here. Let's talk about the second movie and then a little bit of the third movie.
Yeah.
When it comes to, like, I thought about this earlier, and then I think Nathan in chat said this. When we were talking about the flashiness of the combat and how it sort of took away from my investment or enjoyment of the movie, I was hoping that Yoda would get to do some real Jedi Master shit, and he never did. He moved really fast and used a lightsaber. Everyone can do that. Everybody did that. Hundreds of people did that, sometimes dozens on screen at a time. And so that we were told that he was one of the greatest Jedi Masters, little Yoda. And he didn't carry a lightsaber the first time you saw him. He called it, I forget what he called it, I forget what he called a lightsaber, like a Jedi weapon or Jedi tool or something like that. And he always acted like that didn't matter. So I was expecting when it came time for Yoda to intervene, he would walk softly and not move quickly, and he would just close his eyes and lift up his little 4-fingered hand or whatever, and just close his eyes, and using the Force and the environment, just beat Dooku's monkey ass with the Force, or just confuse Dooku, or change his mind and convince him he was wrong and save him from the dark side, because he really was a master of the Force, a light side master. That's not what we were shown at all. We were just shown more of George Lucas saying, okay, we did some boring talk stuff. Now it's time for some action. Let's get that little lightsaber out and have Yoda go to town. And it's like, George, what are you doing? Like, this is not the Yoda that you told us about in action. This is just another Jedi filler cardboard cutout doing more lightsaber choreographed shenanigans with CG. It's not, it had nothing to do with the character as presented, and it just made me completely disengaged from what little I liked of the Yoda character anyway. So there's that.
Well, I mean, if we're going to have, the age when there's still a Jedi Council and an age when the Jedi are still active in the universe, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, what would you expect to see that you didn't? Because if you have that many Jedi, hundreds, like you said, this is the heyday of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't that what you'd expect to see, what we saw?
I think that when it came to the Clone Wars, showing some battles with lots and lots of Jedi with lightsabers, that's acceptable. But I don't know. It's just the way it's presented in the first movie, in the first trilogy, the magic, the Force, and the lightsabers, the magic weapons, they were used as important emotional story beats. And like it was something that you had to care about, and sort of like in samurai movies, it's the sword is only drawn when it is time to spill blood of the whoever, right? And then in the prequels, it was like, this is just another piece of military tech, and force powers are just another piece of combat. And like all throughout the prequels, you got the Jedi getting spooked, whipping out their lightsabers, and as the Red Letter Media pointed out, why is there always this cutaway follow shot to every time a lightsaber is let go of? I remembered that, like my brain remembered that, but I didn't consciously until I saw it on Red Letter Media, and I was like, why is there so much focus on these discarded lightsabers? Why does it even matter? And I feel like that the focus in the prequels was on, look how cool this tech is. Look how cool these force powers are. Look how cool I can make them look on screen. And yeah, that's cool, I guess, but I mean, I can watch how cool CG can look on the internet all the time and look at cute videos that people make, or look at this awesome experimental tech just to see, oh, here's more 3D modeling of what a spaceship or a laser cannon could look like. It was like, it was acting like it was this big epic movie, and it was really just a tech demo. So that made a disconnect with me. However, you're right. When it came time for the Clone Wars stuff to happen and for the clones to fight the Jedi, I'm glad that we got to see a bunch of the Jedi combat action. That's appropriate. That's fine. but I wasn't invested in it and I didn't care, and it lost all of its magic. It just, because we'd already seen lightsabers and force powers and stuff a lot before in those movies, and it wasn't treated with the reverence and the gravitas that it was in the first 3 movies.
So as far as number 2, since we're already here, the other thing about number 2 is we have, this goes back into the A plot, the Palpatine plot. Is we have Dooku on Mustafar confronting Obi-Wan Kenobi, telling him that he's working for the Lord of the Sith. Obi-Wan Kenobi's like, no, that can't possibly be true, which we all know it is. Spoiler alert. And then the question is, well, now what's Dooku, doing with that? You could argue one thing, he's sowing doubt in the minds of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but that's, I think, one of the it's this A plot that I think is really the thing that holds all 3 together. And I think the thing that is the most interesting, because Dooku seems to be doing something all on his own. This doesn't seem to be something that he's directed to do by Palpatine, because it doesn't really help Palpatine. His entire, he says that
nothing in the movie does. Like I said, none of it makes any sense. Like, why? Like, why the Clone Wars? Why this? Why the trade embargo on Padme's planet? If you have the Force and you can manipulate people like Palpatine clearly does, he doesn't need to do a lot of this shit. He can just manipulate things behind the scenes. He can create shortages. He can lobby for things. If he has the mind control powers we are shown he has, he can just manipulate people into starting problems that have to be addressed literally, instead of this gonzo trade dispute, space supplies, not an embassy. What was the big trade conglomerate called? I forget.
It was the Trading Federation.
Yeah, the Trade Federation people. Like, why even involve them at all? If you have the power to manipulate the council and mind control people, and you've got special agents and operatives that you can influence, you can make all kinds of dark shit happen that entities will legitimately have to respond to, and make them dance like you're the puppet master, without having to have this cumbersome, nonsensical bullshit plot that doesn't make any sense from either side of it. And it was just, it hurt my brain trying to understand it when I watched them. And that's another thing that made me disconnect from the movies, is just how stupid it was.
Well, I mean, in that case, why did Palpatine have a Death Star? Like, he doesn't need that.
Yeah, why indeed?
Then that's just the ultimate Star Wars problem, because in episode 4, 5, and 6, I mean, why does Palpatine need stormtroopers? Why does he need Darth Vader? Why does he need
Okay. When I say why indeed, I just mean it's over the top. In the first 3 movies, why is there a Death Star? Because the Empire is at its height. It has massive control, and it rules with an iron fist. They need an iron fist to make examples. That's why the Death Star. And I know that's kind of a heavy-handed fantasy approach instead of a more sensical science fiction approach of just having a lot of ships in a fleet, or having operatives that have boots on the ground everywhere. That's more sensical. But it's not as flashy and cool on screen or as memorable. So the big iron fist, the big evil penis of the Empire is this Death Star super thing that can blow up a planet, right? Like, woohoo. That at least makes sense as presented in the first 3 movies. The way that Dooku is manipulating things, and then General Grievous is both knows what he's doing but doesn't know what he's doing, and then when the trade people say to Palpatine, they were Jedi Knights or whatever, why didn't Palpatine just say, okay, interesting, all right, then play the part, don't do anything rash, and let them go about their way? No, he does the exact opposite of that. Why does he want the Jedi sniffing around things he's connected to? It doesn't make any sense. Is he trying to lead the Jedi to him? Does he already have all of this foreknowledge that he knows exactly who Anakin is and who he's connected to, so he's trying to lead Anakin to him? If he's that wise and powerful, why doesn't he just send Anakin a fucking email? They live in a science fiction setting. He could just send him an email through a functionary and be like, hey, I've heard that this Obi-Wan and this Anakin kid do really good work. I'm taking a trip to so-and-so. I would like the council to provide at least one of them as my bodyguards when I go on this dangerous trip, that he could legitimately set up, and that would look totally normal. And then he would have direct personal connection to the people he wants to manipulate. And you don't need the entirety of the garbage of the first movie. Like I said, I just hate them because of how fucking stupid they are. And forgive my language, I'm sorry. I just get heated about this because it's so dumb.
Wait, so okay, let's go to the Grievous Dooku. This is just a part of the evil overlord trope. So have you ever heard of the evil overlord website where the guy compiles like 200 tropes of evil overlords? Yeah.
Yes.
That's just part of the trope. That's always going to be there. We always have conspiring. That's just a part of the evil overlord trope. Fantasy, well, especially fantasy.
Especially fantasy, yeah.
So I think that's just why we have, I mean, Dooku does have, we could speculate about his motivations, but that's why he's doing it. It's the trope. And that's just a classic part of any evil overlord, dark lord trope. But I mean, I guess then in that case, then in episode 4, 5, and 6, why do the Jedi, why do Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Vader, Yoda, or Emperor need to do anything at all either? Because they've got force powers, but they still have to use intermediaries to get their job done.
Yeah, but they aren't Palpatine that sits in a powerful Senate seat. Like, as presented to us, Palpatine is a mastermind, politician, manipulator, Machiavellian type character. He was in the first movie. There's no reason to think he wasn't in the second movie. He is even presented as such. So why does he make these rock-stupid decisions that seem to only cause problems for him when he could just get what he wants? What does he want? Does he want total control? Does he want total power? Okay, good. Then you don't need the Trade Federation. You don't need the Padme drama. You don't need that. If you have that kind of manipulative power, then you can get to the prophesied child to bid him to the dark side. You don't have to go through all of this rigmarole. If you want the Jedi to be wiped out, if you want them to be gone, then you have to do maybe the clone army thing. But at the same time, here comes the stupidity of the Jedi Council. You have to know that these custodians, these magical universe-sensing custodians, they don't sense their own annihilation coming. They don't sense a massive clone army being created to annihilate them. This catches them off guard? Really? That catches them off guard. It's just rock stupid. I just reject it all as having any value at all as presented in the movies.
Well, you given that you said that in episode 4, 5, and 6, you have to have the Death Star, stormtroopers for all the dark evil overlord nonsense. Well, that's why he needs the clone troopers. He doesn't have that army yet.
Right, but there isn't a Jedi Council that is actively sensing the universe and on guard for this stuff in the first 3 movies. Supposedly, they are at their height in the prequel.
Well, no, they're not at their height.
They're not at their height. I'm sorry. They are in a lofty position.
Their height was like 10,000
and they have
years
powers.
Ago. Yeah.
And they care about prophecy and feeling the universe, and it's like their job to sort of feel the problems coming and head them off at the pass. Are we to believe that Palpatine just used his dark side magic to make the entirety of all the Jedi blind to what was coming? I mean, I guess it's possible, but we weren't told he did that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, so the implication is that the height of the Jedi was a long time ago. And the question is, I mean, the Jedi Council, like any organization, is going to rise and fall. And you might say, yeah, all of that is objectively stupid. And I'm like, yeah, look out your window right now what the U.S. government's doing. It's objectively stupid, and yet they're doing it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's fine. Fair.
But that's all I think Lucas is saying. People in power get complacent and do objectively stupid things.
Okay.
And when people in power do objectively stupid things, it creates openings for other people.
Well,
I mean, I think it's kind of.
I don't have an argument against that. I mean, that's true, but I mean, I'm here to argue why I think that they're bad movies. I think they are worse than the first 3 movies, which I'm not a huge fan of anyway. And I have made my case of why, as movies, I didn't like them and why I think they're stupid. Now, you're making decent criticisms here or not criticisms. You are making decent explanations here of, well, this is what these things can mean. But as a movie viewer and judging it as a movie, those things are not presented. Those things are not presented. You seem to be ascribing meanings that Lucas wanted us to feel that are very well hidden to the point to where I argue that there's no way to prove that that's what we're supposed to think and feel when we watch them. Okay,
this is actually a nice segue into Jar Jar. So,
okay, let's do that because I'm excited about this topic.
Here's the thing. I actually don't think these are hidden. No, but I think this is. So Jar Jar, so it was like, I think it was 2015 on Reddit. There was a guy named Lumpawaru who came up with the idea that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord. And he goes through all of these points. I won't go through all of them, but some of the more interesting points that he makes. One is Lucas himself says, Jar Jar is very important. Jar Jar is the key to all this. So whatever that means, that was, I think, in the what do you call it? At the end of a movie, when you got the DVD, there's like the special features where it's like how the movie was made.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in there. But Jar Jar is clearly incompetent. At least that's the impression we're supposed to get. At the end of episode 1, he's promoted to general. In episode 2, becomes a senator. And in episode 3, he gives Palpatine his special powers. He grants him emergency powers. Also, the fact that there's a really weird scene in Tatooine where it looks like he's directing them to go to find Anakin, because the bodyguard, Padme's African American bodyguard, is talking, and then behind him, Jar Jar is talking but not saying anything. Like it's almost like he's like using his force powers to force this guy to say something, which will then force all of them to make a course correction and run into Anakin. There's the scene right before the race where Jar Jar messes with the pod racer, and some people think that was him,
sabotaging.
Yeah. But it was actually him, I guess, fixing it or something.
Yeah.
And then also there was what else did he have? There was a fighting style called drunken fist fighting, which I guess is like Buddhist or Hindu or something. Okay. And they claim that Jar Jar in the Battle of Naboo is fighting that way. He does some weird kung fu stuff if you're paying attention. And what's interesting is long before this, in the early 2000s, Cartoon Network's Robot Chicken pointed this out. There was a skit where Palpatine calls Jar Jar and says, "I'm sorry for forcing you to give me emergency powers." And then it cuts out to Jar Jar laughing as an evil Sith Lord. So this wasn't something that was fully invented by Lump of Water. This is like someone on the Cartoon Network team figured that out too.
Sure, so, that's fine.
That I think. Okay, so the distinction I would want to make is this is a genuinely esoteric truth, if it is true, and I'm inclined to think that there's enough clues that it is. I think something like the A plot for Dooku and Palpatine is not hidden in that way. At least according to the way I read the films, I don't think it's hidden that way. But I think Jar Jar is legitimately hidden. And the reason why is because episode 1 had such a negative backlash. They wanted to tamp down on Jar Jar. And so that's why he doesn't fit. It's like episode 1 is a huge role for Jar Jar. 2 and 3, he's almost non-existent.
Okay.
So that's
I don't think that I'm invested enough in this to counter that. I do remember there being a massive backlash from fandom that I heard about in the early aughts about how people hated Jar Jar. So maybe that did influence. Maybe he was supposed to have been, more active, or maybe even some kind of powerful Sith or whatever. I don't know. I don't care. I see some pushback in the chat here. I recognize you guys saying the things that were quotes from the movie. I don't have the wherewithal to be able to conjure forth the things that I remember thinking were stupid when I watched the movies. I watched them all over again, but I think that was 2010, 2011. It's been a long time since I've seen the prequels. And when I rewatched them, I thought that the decisions made were even dumber than when I first watched them. I'm sorry that I'm not prepared, but I didn't want to spend 10 hours of my week watching movies I don't like to prepare for this. I'm sorry. So I can't directly address the arguments in the chat, but I do see them. Thank you for participating. I wish I could say more, but I can't. I do know that some of the things are addressed. I talked about with simple little throwaway pieces of dialogue, like a couple of the quotes that somebody put in the chat here. My issue is, as a viewer, I don't care. As a viewer, okay, have you heard the phrase showing is better than telling when it comes to movies? In the prequels, I'm not really shown anything. I am told that I should not believe my lying eyes, that the things I'm seeing that I think are dumb and don't make sense. Oh, here's a little line of dialogue that George Lucas came up with to put another patch on this piece of shit story and this horrible movie that's fallen apart and hemorrhaging meaning at the seams. So I don't think that a couple of throwaway lines of dialogue is an excuse or explains away my criticisms. Now, that's my stance, of course. It's just an opinion, so whatever. But I wanted to address that. Secondly, since you said this is only going to be around an hour of a stream, I don't have much to say about the perhaps Jar Jar mastermind thing. It's very interesting, and I wish they would have done more with that. That could have been cool. And is there anything you want me to speak about that? Because I don't really have anything that feels like I should respond to it. Anything in particular you want to ask me about it?
No, I was just throwing that out there to see if it stuck or not. So let me ask this question.
Sure.
So on the one hand, there are movies and films that are primarily dialogue heavy. Think of like the Cold War thriller Failsafe about atomic.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, well, it's about the black box for the atomic bomb on each of the bombers back when you had strategic bombers flying in the North Pole.
Yeah,
and that's almost entirely dialogue, right? And that's a Cold War thriller. Now, that for people who like those genres of films, that's considered a classic. And then there's like classic action films. You could think of like any of the Errol Flynn films. Is your objection that episode 1, 2, and 3 was mixing genres? Because
no, not more so than my main argument of it was inconsistent with the universe as presented and told with proper storytelling in the first 3 movies, and an almost complete absence of real storytelling and good writing in the prequels. Again, like I said earlier in the stream, the things that are interesting about the prequels could have made them much better movies than the first 3. The intrigue, the political stuff, the manipulation, knowing that Anakin will fall to the dark side, knowing that there's going to be this epic battle coming, knowing that these Jedi Council are in their last days and something's going to happen to them. Those are all wonderful building blocks that could have given us a great series of movies. They just didn't. It was ineptly, terribly done, and it just sucks. There's nothing else to say. It just sucks. It fell flat. It wasn't interesting. It was boring. If it was one genre, either action. If you have an action movie, you got to be invested. The characters have to be cool and likable. You got to be invested in the action, what they're fighting for, et cetera, et cetera. Or it's just action schlock and you watch it and forget it. Or you have a drama like the movie you mentioned. You have interesting intrigue. And that is where writing and dialogue and meaning and purpose and drive and choices matter the most. I argue that that the prequels fail miserably in both genres. The writing's flat. The blocking is flat. I have extreme problems with motivation and choices of all characters involved. And then when it comes to the action part, for reasons I've already mentioned, I have no investment in anything going on. So it's just pretty flashy showcase of what you can do with CG. That's my main criticism of the movies. They fail at what they want to present in multiple ways. And there's nothing there that draws me in as a viewer, other than looking at them as a spectacle to laugh at how terrible they are, or like the interesting things you brought up tonight, think about what could have been, and in my own mind, imagine a much more interesting story with the building blocks that are there.
Well, let's look at Qui-Gon's motivation. I mean, I think that's a pretty apparent and relatable. I mean, I know what it's like to go up against an entrenched, up its own ass establishment that doesn't want to do what it really needs to do. And so you have to sort of operate on the outside and the margins. And that is partially communicated to Obi-Wan Kenobi. He wants to be more of a team player, but he's still willing to play outside the margins. I mean, I think that's just the classic American maverick. I think that that I guess you could say subplot is fairly intuitive to anybody watching it. And I thought that for what it was fine. I think that where the difference is going to come down to, I think that the A plot of Palpatine's power grab, I guess you could say the B plot of Anakin, because that's the other one. I don't think they're as opaque as your reading of the film is, but that's where the difference is going to be. Does the individual viewer see that or not? And if the individual viewer doesn't, then they're going to say, well, that for whatever reason, then that's not communicated to me. But for me, when I watched it, as a kid, for the first time, a lot of that seemed pretty intuitive to me. So just for what it was worth, 14, 15, 16, when those were coming out, the A plot with Palpatine seemed pretty straightforward. In fact, what I liked about the A plot with Palpatine was it tied into the intrigue and political history, the history that I had read about how power is assembled in the hands of a single man, like a Caesar. So, for example, I felt that Palpatine did something that was plausible. I mean, obviously it's in space. Obviously, suspension of disbelief and all that. But that's actually more risky, right? Because I think on the other hand, the original trilogy is pretty flat. It's like, mid 20th century Germans in space. How original. How original. And plucky Viet Cong fighting the American,
Yeah.
I mean, wow. Okay, wow.
Yeah.
No.
No, I'm not. Again, I'm not saying that like the first three movies are these epic masterpieces, and by comparison, it's garbage, or the prequels are garbage. I'm just saying that as a person who likes movies and likes fantasy fiction and science fiction, I think that there are massive failures in execution that could have dramatically changed my opinions of the movies. If you guys want me to make a list of the things that I thought were stupid in the movies, that would take me a lot of hours I don't want to spend. I'm just telling you my sensations. I see somebody in the chat saying I'm just regurgitating red letter media. Well, there's a reason for that. I'm old. I had these problems with the movies when they came out, and I watched them. My husband and I were already together and married when the second movie came out. So we were already bitching and complaining about the same shit we saw Red Letter Media talk about years later. It's not like I'm just getting all of my ideas from Red Letter. They're just a lot like me. And my husband and I both are very ferocious movie critics. We criticize a lot. He's into reading. I'm not a good reader, but he loves literature. He's read thousands of books. And he criticizes literature harshly too. And we're very critical people when it comes to what makes something good as fiction. And I don't think that the prequels are good fiction. I wish they were. There's some good things that I think could have been excellent, like we talked about earlier. It's just, it falls flat, and those are my opinions. I'm not just regurgitating Mike. So.
All right. Well, I think it's probably about time to wrap up. So what I'll say is this. I think that the fights at the end of episode 1 and episode 3 were definitely visually some of the high points of the prequel trilogy. Jar Jar is totally a Sith Lord, guys, and that's all I gotta say. So, Yizz, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are: I don't hate the prequels like some people do. They didn't affect me like Mike Stacklasa, for example, but I am not willing to defend them as having merit as movies. Having merit as an idea, yes, I agree with you on that. I think that if done by a competent director, or a director who was maybe differently motivated than George, and if it was presented with good writing and we were shown instead of told, then they could have been much better movies. But as they stand, my criticism is still very harshly no. They are bad movies, bad implementation, not engaging, not fun, and kind of stupid. So, that's just how I feel about them. And again, not a huge fan of the first movies anyway. So, I mean, I'm not that invested in it, other than Star Wars was big, and so I've had to hear about it my whole life. And I have opinions on all fiction when it comes to bad writing, stupid storytelling, and intelligent characters that we are told or shown are intelligent, making choices and doing things that I think are unintelligent. That's my main problem with the movies. In summary, this was a lot of fun. I like talking to you. I'd love to do this again sometime if you want, maybe talking about other fiction, or if you want more specifics on Star Wars with me, I'll go back and rewatch the damn movies, all of them, not the Disney ones, unless you really want me to. And we can talk about the original trilogy versus the prequels. If you want me to, and if you want to make this maybe another 2 or 3 parts, I will spend the time to look into them again with your ideas in mind and see what comes of that, if you would like me to do that and do this again another day.
Well, I would certainly be down for future cultural critical engagement. I don't necessarily know if I want to do Star Wars again, because like you, I'm not hugely invested in Star Wars.
Okay.
Star Wars is an easy entry point for people. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be interesting to do like a detailed analysis of all 6 films.
Mm-hmm.
That there is potential merit in that. I don't know if or when I'd want to do that, because I mean, to be honest, that could be a lot of fun. Just going through all 6 of the films. But
I would do that with you if you wanted sometime. That would be a fun series.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying I won't do it. I'm just saying it's not a plan in the near future.
Sure.
So before we wrap up, Yizz, where can people find your work and engage with you in the future?
I am on Rumble, Odyssey, and YouTube. My findmyfriends.net has not been updated to have my Rumble on it. I dropped DLive in favor of Rumble because DLive sucks and I don't want to use it anymore. But my Find My Friends does not have my Rumble link on there yet. So let me grab that for you real fast and I'll put that in the chat as well. You can also find me on Gab, Twitter, Minds.com, Discord, and Telegram. You can always find me by my epithet that I have claimed, Yizz the Eunuch. Please check out my content. I have a fun variety show on Monday nights where it's called Discordant Dragons, where I assemble a party to explain our clown world to interested fantasy dragons from Dungeons and Dragons that they're interested in our world. We laugh at memes and watch funny, naughty videos like old band war propaganda cartoons and things like that at the end. That's my main thing I do that's my main thing that I do each week. I also have a morning walk series where I sort of share wisdom and opine upon current events and what people can do and should do with their life, a little mix of counseling and philosophy and current event stuff. I make 1 or 2 of those a week. I also have a Corner Club series, which I would love to do one with you when you can, where it's a one-on-one like this, where I shop other content creators, whether it be music, movies, YouTube creators, that kind of thing, just to get to know them and to introduce my audience to content creators that I like. And I'd love to do that with you sometime. That's called the Corner Club series. And those are not at set times because I work with other people's schedule. They usually occur on Sunday afternoons, sometime during the day Tuesdays like we're doing today, or sometime during the day Wednesdays. That's usually when I do Corner Club. So that's me. I have a lot of interesting, fun stuff to say. I hope that you would agree. Come check me out, and maybe we'll see each other again on Discordant Dragons one day, Todd. But I'll definitely stream with you one-on-one about pretty much anything. You're a smart guy. I like the cut of your jib, and you're fun to talk to.
Well, thank you, Yizz. And yeah, I definitely look forward to future stuff. I'm sure we can swing some more DD soon.
Sure.
But thanks again. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.